Very good afternoon and welcome to viewers on BBC One who've joined us for this BBC News special at Westminster. Some very dramatic events here in Westminster in the past couple of hours. Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister, a few minutes ago has transformed things here by announcing that he will in fact be stepping down as leader of the Labour Party. Within a few months, there'll certainly be a new Labour leader in place by the party conference season in September, October. And Mr Brown signalling that there are now going to be serious negotiations taking place on policy issues between a Labour negotiating team and the Liberal Democrats. Why has all this changed? Because we've been talking in the past few days about talks between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. Well, those talks will continue, but the big development today is that the Prime Minister has intervened in the process and said, look, if these come to nothing, if the Conservatives and the Lib Dems can't come to an agreement, I'm here, I'm ready to facilitate negotiations, and as part of facilitating stable and strong government, in his words, he will step down as party leader. Very dramatic news, and our political editor Nick Robinson will be talking about that with us in a second. But before that, let's just listen once again to what the Prime Minister had to say.
We have a parliamentary and not presidential system in this country. And as I said on Friday, with no party able to command a parliamentary majority arising from the general election, my constitutional duty as Prime Minister is to ensure that government continues while parties explore options for forming a new administration with majority support in the House of Commons. The business of government has continued, including concerted action in Europe today to avert the financial crisis in the euro area. Alistair Darling, the Chancellor, spent much of his time yesterday in the European Finance Ministers meeting in Brussels. This morning I have had conversations with the President of the European Council, the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund and the President of the European Central Bank. I have said I would do all I could to ensure that a stable, strong and principled government is formed, able to tackle Britain's economic and political challenges effectively. As we know, the Liberal Democrats felt that they should first talk to the Conservative Party. Mr Clegg has just informed me that while he intends to continue his dialogue that he has begun with the Conservatives, he now wishes also to take forward formal discussions with the Labour Party. I believe it is sensible and it's in the national interest to respond positively. The Cabinet will meet soon. A formal policy negotiating process is being established under the arrangements made by the Cabinet Secretary, similar to the negotiations between other parties. The first priority should be an agreed deficit reduction plan to support economic growth and a return to full employment. I know that both parties recognise the importance of ensuring economic stability in the markets and protecting Britain's standing, and both are agreed on the need for a strong and full deficit reduction plan over the coming years. There is also a progressive majority in Britain, and I believe it could be in the interest of the whole country to form a progressive coalition government. In addition to the economic priorities, in my view, only such a progressive government could meet the demand for political and electoral change which the British people made last Thursday. Our commitments on a new voting system for the House of Commons and for the election of the House of Lords are clearly part of this. I would, however, like to say something also about my own position. If it becomes clear that the national interest, which is stable and principled government, can be best served by forming a coalition between the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, then I believe I should discharge that duty to form that government, which would, in my view, command a majority in the House of Commons in the Queen's speech and any other confidence votes. But I have no desire to stay in my position longer than is needed to ensure the path to economic growth is assured and the process of political reform we have agreed moves forward quickly. The reason that we have a hung parliament is that no single party and no single leader was able to win the full support of the country. As leader of my party, I must accept that that is a judgment on me. I therefore intend to ask the Labour Party to set in train the processes needed for its own leadership election. I would hope that it would be completed in time for the new leader to be in post by the time of the Labour Party conference. I will play no part in that contest. I will back no individual candidate. I believe that the British people now want us to focus on the economy, the continuing fight against terrorism, the terrorist threat to our country. They want us to continue to pursue the economic recovery, and I will do so with my usual vigour and determination. And I will do all in my power to support the British troops whose service and sacrifice create a debt of gratitude we can never fully repay. And I believe on Thursday the country was also telling us that they want a new politics and that the political reforms we seek will help deliver that change. I now intend to facilitate the discussions that the Liberal Democratic Party has asked for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Prime Minister making that dramatic statement in Downing Street within the past 20 minutes or so, and announcing that as part of the process of trying to get a stable government together, he would be stepping down as Labour leader. He wouldn't be Prime Minister, certainly by the time the party conference season comes along in September. So to discuss all this, some people who've got, well, very specialised vantage points, to say the least. Alistair Campbell, who of course was Tony Blair's Director of Communications, number 10. From the Cabinet right now, Labour's Lord Adonis. Lord Steele is still with us, and our political editor, Nick Robinson, too. And I'll come to the guests in a second. Nick, for viewers who've just joined us, let's just put this in context. What has Gordon Brown done here?
Well, Gordon Brown has just opened up a completely different possibility for the Government of Britain. So instead of it being a conversation that is purely limited to a Tory Liberal Democrat arrangement, or possibly a coalition, though unlikely, he is now offering a full coalition with the Liberal Democrats, in which we'd see senior Liberal Democrats sitting around the Cabinet table. He's unlocked that by saying, in effect, if I'm the problem, and let's be honest, he was for many Liberal Democrats, he's saying, I'm not going now, but I will be gone quite soon. So you're going to have to live with me for a while, but I'll be gone. Just one thing, though, Hugh. It raises three problems for your guests, all of whom here will think that this is a very, very good idea, and I suspect have been talking privately amongst themselves for a very long time about how to engineer it. Problem one is this, if I may. You still get Gordon Brown. Maybe not for long, but you still get him. Problem two, you then get an unelected Prime Minister, as against someone that the electorate had the chance to look at, is another problem. And problem three is their critics, their enemies in the press, will call this a losers' coalition, who've come together in order to make things easy for themselves while pretending it's in the national interest. I look forward to their answers.
Lord Adonis, it's your turn.
Let me take Nick's point.
Constitutional election first.
Let me take Nick's point. No party won this election. Let's be clear. The reason why we're all having these discussions is that the British people last Thursday decided not to give a majority to any one party. So we all have a duty to discuss with each other how we form a strong, stable and principled government in the light of the decision of the British people. Now, Nick Clegg, who holds the balancing block in the House of Commons, decided first to speak to the Conservative Party. That was absolutely his right. He has now said he wishes to enter into formal discussions with the Labour Party. I hope those discussions are successful and it is possible to form a coalition government between Labour and the Liberal Democrats. As I've been saying now over many months, ideologically and in policy terms, we are very close together, Labour and the Liberal Democrats. This would be a partnership of principle. I believe it has the capacity to form a strong, stable government, able to take on Britain's economic and political challenges, and we will go into those negotiations determined to make them succeed on behalf of the British people.
But built on what, Andrew? Built on a very flimsy coalition of votes?
No one party can command a majority in the House of Commons. 15 million people voted for Labour and the Liberal Democrats combined last Thursday. Only 10 million people voted for the Conservative Party last Thursday. There would be absolute democratic legitimacy behind an arrangement between Labour and the Liberal Democrats, but obviously there are a lot of negotiations to come.
Can I make a point here as well about the the illegitimacy of what Nick calls an unelected Prime Minister, should there be a new Labour leader who then becomes Prime Minister. It's a parliamentary democracy. That's Parliament behind us. It's not a presidential system. The TV debates gave the impression of it being presidential. It's one of the reasons why I was never absolutely, totally in favour of them. So what you're doing when you cast your vote at the ballot box, you're voting for a candidate, the candidates then form the blocks that will form the government, and from that emerges a leader. And that's how our system works. So I don't accept the point about the legitimacy of the process, as Gordon said, in train.
And in any case, John Major and Alec Douglas
there's plenty of precedent,
Yeah.
And also I think what Gordon did today, as he did on Friday, and look, Andrew and I were both with Gordon on as the results were coming in, and look, there were times during the campaign when we thought we were going to do very, very badly. On the night, I actually felt we were doing maybe better than sometimes I thought we would, but Gordon was always pretty clear that he didn't win that election. And I think the way he's conducted himself since then has genuinely been about trying to steer the country through this very odd constitutional situation, which none of us have really experienced before. David might have done, but my generation, Andrew's generation, we haven't.
Come off it. I'm not that old.
I know you're not that old, but you were there. And the point is, I think what he's done now is in a sense flushed out publicly the reality of where we are. You're still left with three choices: a Tory minority government, a Tory Liberal arrangement of some sort, and those talks are going on. But what I hear from the Liberal Democrats is that they're not going as well as perhaps they want them to. And therefore, Nick Clegg has said to Gordon Brown, let's at least set up this other channel and we can have those discussions. They may come to nothing, we don't know.
Okay, Nick.
The phrase that has been repeated but not explained is strong and stable. The Conservatives on their own is clearly not strong and stable. They don't have a majority. Labour on their own is clearly not. But the Conservatives with the Liberal Democrats would have a significant majority in the House of Commons. The Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, together with one or two others, a Green and Alliance and so on and so forth, would still be, by no constitutional definition, either strong or stable. Not strong because they wouldn't have a parliamentary majority, not stable because they would have at times to rely on the support of the Welsh and Scottish nationalists, perhaps the Democratic Unionists in Northern Ireland, to abstain if not to vote for them, and this would raise worries that Paddy Ashton himself from the Liberal Democrats has raised, that they would effectively be held to ransom by nationalist demands from other smaller parties.
It is undeniable that an arrangement with the Conservatives is arithmetically better than an arrangement with Labour. There's no dispute about that. But whether it's politically sensible is another matter. And let me just answer Nick Robinson's accusation. I have not talked either to Alistair or Andrew before, or anybody in the Labour Party. So,
but let's also, can I take up Nick's point? Strength doesn't just come from the precise number of seats you have in the House of Commons. It comes from your unity of purpose. Now, some of us who've been watching these conversations between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats in recent days have been moderately bemused at the prospect of these two parties, which are a gulf apart in terms of their attitude to public services, to taxation, to Europe. You just go through to political reform, to the voting system, which we just talked about. All of these issues, they're a gulf apart. The idea you could have a strong and stable government between those two parties simply because arithmetically they constitute a majority in the House of Commons, that idea is for the birds. Whereas Labour and the Liberal Democrats, I believe it is possible for us to form a strong, stable and principled government.
Well, is it really for the birds, given that they've spent 4 days talking about some very big policy areas? Clearly, they've got quite a few common areas to talk about, and clearly they've got hopes that they may be able to tie up some loose ends. That was the gist of David Law's statement today.
Hugh, it would have been irresponsible not to talk to the party with the largest number of seats, surely. I mean, that was a natural thing to do. And they're right, these talks are still going on. We mustn't just assume, because Gordon Brown has made the statement, therefore it's going to be a Labour government.
They may reach somewhere.
Here's the puzzle, Hugh. I've just been over in the House of Commons, and there was an opportunity for David Law, the chief negotiator for the Liberal Democrats, to make all these points, to say, you know, there's a real problem with Europe with the Tories, we're very worried about that, or the economy. Neither did he say. He said they wanted clarification on school funding, on fair taxes and voting reform. So there's an interesting question facing Nick Clegg. If he wishes to walk away from these Tory talks and go in with the Labour Party, which many in his party would want dearly, including very senior figures in his own party, How would he quite explain it? Because he has not set this Tory talks process up for a fall. He hasn't said in advance, I'm very worried it's a European economic crisis and these guys are Eurosceptics. He's talked about rather micro, detailed clarifications. Now, it may be that there's a gulf, I think there is in truth, between his view and most in his party.
Oh, that's interesting.
But I also think that Nick Clegg is behaving perfectly properly in trying to keep all his options open, because all of the options have to be explored as to what government might emerge from all this. But I mean, look, the Nick Clegg, it came as no surprise to Nick Clegg whatsoever what Gordon Brown was going to say and what he announced and the nature of that. And I think what that says is that if you like, the goodwill from the Liberal Democrats towards the Labour Party is every bit. I think they are conducting these negotiations in a spirit of goodwill. I think that's sensible. But I think what Gordon has done today has made clear, if those, as he said on Friday, if those talks go nowhere, there is another possibility. Equally, he's made clear, because of the economic situation in Europe in particular, there is a kind of urgency now. This thing, people do have to start making decisions. And I think that forcing the pace a little bit in that way, it will do all of the parties a bit of good.
We'll have to go back to number 10 in a second. Lord Adonis, just before we do, for the benefit of all the viewers who are now joining us, and just wondering whether you can underline for us, given your position in the talks and in Cabinet and your closeness to Gordon Brown and all the rest of it, what are the prospects then now of a deal between the Liberal Democrats and Labour?
It's far too soon to say. We haven't started the
But you are hopeful that a deal can be reached?
Oh, I believe on the basis of our philosophy that we share between us, where both parties are modernising social democratic parties, and on the basis of the policies we set out in our manifestos for the election last Thursday, I believe there is a good prospect of us being able to reach an agreement. But we haven't started the discussions yet, and it's premature to
There's one other point here which I think is really important. I worked with somebody at the Labour Party campaign headquarters, passionate Labour Party member, totally committed to Labour. I happen to know she voted Lib Dem in a seat where she wanted to keep the Tories out. And there's lots did it the other way around as well. So,
and in fact, changing the voting system will bring an end to the need for tactical voting. That is a very good point that Alistair's making.
Nick, final word before we go back to Downing Street.
Well, be clear, there are a lot of people spent a lot of time thinking and hoping for this day within the Labour and Liberal Democrat parties, and there are people who've already on the back of envelopes said, oh yeah, Penny Ashdown might go to defence, Nick Clegg may be the next Home Secretary, Vince Cable might move to business. This is serious stuff we're talking about. We're talking about a coalition the like of which we've not seen since the Second World War, a progressive alliance, as they would put it, between two parties who've dallied with each other but not quite ever consummated it. It is a profound shift in British politics, not just a decision about kind of whose bum's on which ministerial seat in the back of a car. And it's an extraordinarily tough decision for Nick Clegg, because if he goes with it, there's a potentially exciting prospect for him, deeply exciting for his party, but also the opprobrium that will be poured on to his head by the Tory press, by people who say, you've eaten your words, Mr. Clegg.
The Tory press shot a lot of bolts in the campaign. The Tory press tried to destroy Gordon Brown, they tried to destroy the Labour Party and Nick Clegg, and I don't think they have quite the clout they think they do.
But if you were his advisor, Alistair, you would have to tell him how to eat his own words. He said that the Tories had a legitimacy to government. He said that he's only got one or two micro-policy problems.
And he may
how
still
would
end up...
An interesting question.
He
if he comes with you, what does he say as his excuse for walking away from the talks with the party that won this election?
Well, they didn't win the election.
Most seats and most
They've got the most seats. What I think he says, if he does do that, is, as Andrew just indicated, there is actually a greater commonality of purpose and policy and vision and ideas between these two progressive parties, as opposed to this very right-wing, ideological, backward-looking Conservative Party, which, let's be honest, with all the support they had in the Tory press, all the money they had from Lord Ashcroft and all of the rest of it, fair wind, they didn't win.
Andrew, is that a credible message?
It absolutely got a message. Latch on to the fact that Labour plus the Liberal Democrats, 15 million votes, Conservatives 10 million votes. That's the fundamental basis of the legitimacy.
We mustn't just sit here assuming that that's going to happen.
No, they still may end up with the Tories.
It's good to remind us.
Thank you
very much. Let's take a slight pause. If you've just joined us here on BBC One and on the BBC News channel, this is a news special from Westminster. Gordon Brown has announced in the past hour that he is to step down as Labour leader. There'll be a new Labour leader in place by the time of the party conference in the autumn. And why has he done that? that? Well, in order to facilitate the bringing together, as he hopes, of the Liberal Democrats and Labour and some of the other parties in a coalition. That option has opened up in a very serious way this afternoon, but, as Lord Steele has reminded us, there are still talks going on between the Conservatives and the Lib Dems, so let's not discount that option either. And with that thought, let's join John Sopel in Downing Street.
Hugh, thank you very much. Well, there have been dramatic scenes in Downing Street over the years that we've all witnessed, but I don't think any quite like this. The Prime Minister announcing that in the name of trying to make progress on some sort of progressive coalition, as he called it, he would sacrifice himself and stand down as the Labour Party leader. We understand there's going to be a cabinet meeting starting fairly shortly. Let's bring in our political correspondent, Ian Watson. So what is the process that happens now?
The Cabinet's going to meet at 6 o'clock. They're going to discuss this idea of a progressive alliance. Many Cabinet members are already signed up to it, some of whom haven't been involved in close discussions, such as Peter Hain and Ben Bradshaw, long-standing advocates of electoral reform. There will be one or two sceptical voices, I understand, as well. But if that's the price they're willing to pay to keep the Conservatives out, it's likely there'll be some agreement. Then, of course, the one thing that is certain in all this, negotiations going on between the Lib Dems and Conservatives, between Labour now and the Conservatives, one thing that's certain, Gordon Brown stands down as party leader. So tomorrow, Labour's ruling National Executive Committee, which brings together MPs, trade unionists, some of their affiliated organisations, they're going to transform a run-of-the-mill organisational meeting into a formal meeting to discuss the next moves. They're then going to meet again on the 18th of May and discuss a timetable for electing a replacement for Gordon Brown. I'm told that will take probably 7 or 8 weeks. But as Gordon Brown was indicating, he wants a new leader in place by the time of the party conference in the autumn. So I suspect they'll be opening nominations within the next week, maybe even the next few days, for alternative occupants of Downing Street should the Lib Dem deal be struck.
Now, Gordon Brown will still be Prime Minister during that period, if they pull this off, this coalition talks. But what Gordon Brown was emphasising was the need for stability during this difficult economic time. How focused will the candidates for the Labour leadership and the Prime Ministership be on their jobs if they're busy trying to garner votes from the trade union movement, from Labour's party supporters and all the rest of it?
I think that is one of the potential difficulties, that in effect, in the middle of an economic crisis, and don't forget what the Prime Minister was saying there on the steps of Downing Street before he talked about his own future. He talked about the economic conditions that Britain was facing at the moment. He's been stressing how focused they are on it. The Chancellor is, of course, over in Europe discussing the Eurozone, and yet they're going to be opening up pretty soon a Labour Party leadership contest where potentially it could be people at each other's throats. If one of his close allies, Ed Balls, who's been in there today, stands against David Miliband, who's also been a central figure in the Labour Party, presumably they're going to have at the very least a civilised argument over the future direction of the Labour Party, when the economy, of course, is still in very, very fragile state in the early stages of recovery. Now, of course, the other alternative to all this is that the Liberal Democrats think there'll be a backlash against them if they go down that road, and that moves them closer to doing a deal with the Conservatives after all, despite the dramatic events we've just witnessed.
And the decision of Gordon Brown to stand down, do you think that has entirely been forced upon Gordon Brown by Nick Clegg's stance saying, look, you can't be part of this progressive coalition? Or do you think there were cabinet members who were also saying, look, we've lost the election, were you still to be there when the smoke has cleared as the Prime Minister? The British people might not accept that.
I think there's been a twin-track approach. First of all, the Liberal Democrat negotiators that spoke to very senior figures here, including Peter Mandelson, including Ed Balls over the weekend, have made it absolutely clear. If Labour wanted serious negotiations on this progressive alliance, on an anti-Tory, if you like, coalition, then Gordon Brown's future had to be part of that, and he had to leave Downing Street. They wanted a timetable, a very swift timetable for his departure. He's given a relatively swift timetable. Actually, he'll definitely be out by the autumn. The people who were talking to him this afternoon, I understand, when they were, as it were, negotiating with him, Gordon Brown was saying, for example, that perhaps he could stay on a little bit longer to ensure economic stability.
Just one other thought, very quickly. Gordon Brown will presumably appoint a negotiating team. It would make sense for the main contenders for the leadership, because they're going to have to be the people that would deal with the Liberal Democrats long term, to be part of that.
Absolutely, we've got no indication of that yet, but if they have to be tied in to whatever the outcome's going to be, and if the Liberal Democrats want a stable coalition, they've got to know what the next leader of the Labour Party will deliver for them. So it would be inconceivable that they wouldn't be involved, and it is interesting that certainly Ed Balls has been very closely involved in negotiations about this, and directly in negotiations with the Liberal Democrats, even though he was one of the people who seemed to be most sceptical towards the Liberal Democrats previously within the Labour Party.
Fascinating to see who gets appointed to that negotiation team. Hugh, back to you.
John, thank you very much, and thanks to Ian too for that latest update on the thinking from within Downing Street. If you've just joined us here on BBC One, the BBC News Channel and BBC World, the news here at Westminster this afternoon is that Gordon Brown has decided to stand down as Labour leader. He will be replaced in time for the party conference in September. And that's all part of Labour's effort to get serious talks going between the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats to try to form some kind of government, whether it's a formal coalition or what the form of it, of course, is yet to be decided, but some kind of agreement between Labour and the Lib Dems and possibly some other parties too. We had Lord Adonis, the Cabinet Minister, with us earlier on. We have one of his Cabinet colleagues, Douglas Alexander, who's just joined us now, and it's good to have you with us. Nick Robinson's still with us, our political editor. What's the thinking?
I think it was the measure of the man, and Gordon has a sense of duty which is deep and strong. He thought it was his duty to resign as leader of the Labour Party after the result on Thursday evening, and he thinks it's his duty to meet his constitutional obligation as Prime Minister to try and facilitate the emergence of a majority government in the House of Commons. He said in his statement on Friday that it was appropriate for the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats to hold their discussions. It's now emerged that the Liberal Democrats have formally requested the Labour Party engage in those negotiations, and so we are now preparing to undertake those negotiations in the days ahead.
And the Prime Minister sort of admitting that while he's there, that process can't really come to full fruition.
No, he's going to be leading the Labour Party during that process of negotiation, but he was also clear in a statement that I thought was dignified and big, actually, that he accepted in part that the election result was a judgment in that no political party had managed to secure a majority of the seats in the House of Commons. So he made a judgment that he wanted to demit office as leader of the Labour Party. But in the meantime, there was a separate statement made by Nick Clegg requesting formal negotiations with the Labour Party, and we'll be taking forward those negotiations in the days ahead.
Taking those big words, stable government and strong government, which all the leaders have been keen to underline for reasons we all understand. Nick was making the point earlier. When you look at the logistics of putting together a Labour, Lib Dem and others deal, if I can put it that way, it looks pretty flimsy.
It's tough, but listen, the people are the boss in this business, and we don't get to choose who's elected to the House of Commons. The people did last Thursday.
But it's
and in
not
that
stable
sense,
government, is it?
But in that sense, that's a challenge for all the politicians. Now, it may be that the negotiations between the Labour Party and the Liberals go nowhere. Let's be honest about that. It may equally be that the negotiations between the Liberals and the Conservatives go nowhere. In that sense, the task for all of us is to try and work towards a stable, strong and principled government. We believe that it is worth having those discussions with the Liberal Democrats. Let's see where they lead.
Nick, your thoughts?
Well, the people is the boss is an interesting phrase, because Douglas Alexander will know, Gordon Brown will know, that what many people say tomorrow and tonight is, if the people are the boss, how come we end up with Gordon Brown still as our Prime Minister? Yes, not forever, but possibly for another 6 months. And that is a question that I think will be asked again and again. It will be asked of Nick Clegg, who's pretty scathing, let's remember. He talks about Gordon Brown squatting in Downing Street at one stage. Now, to be fair to him, he was referring to a possible scenario in which Labour came third, so that's not the scenario we're in, but the words will haunt him nevertheless. He said that that would be illegitimate. And the difficult transition point I think we're at now is, I think emotionally, the Liberal Democrat Party is already in this coalition. That's where most of them want to be. That's where a lot of the key leadership, and we're seeing an important generational shift here, want to be. But getting from where the Lib Dems are and the language they've used to where they want to be is going to be a mighty difficult task.
Do you agree?
I think it's going to be a challenge. None of us know the outcome of these negotiations. This is a bit like the continuation of an election where none of us knew how it was going to end. The truth is, we've got a responsibility, Gordon Brown has a responsibility as the Prime Minister, to try and facilitate the establishment of a government that can command a majority in the House of Commons. Now, we didn't manage to get a majority last Thursday, but frankly, neither did David Cameron. And in that sense, it's perfectly appropriate that the parties try and work together in the days ahead to secure that stable and principled government. And in that sense, we will give it our best shot. It may fail, but equally it may be the case that the Liberals and the Conservatives are able to resolve their differences. Frankly, none of us know.
We'll leave it there for a second, Douglas. Thank you very much. Douglas Alexander and Nick will be back in a second. But our chief political correspondent, Laura Kuenssberg. I think Laura's outside the Houses of Parliament with some guests there. Laura.
Thanks very much indeed, Hugh. Well, of course, MPs are only just hearing this news, taking it in, but I am told that in Portcullis House behind me, there are already some representatives of the potential next Labour leader, doing the rounds, already trying to get colleagues on side. But we'll try to get some more on that for you later. But let's pick up with three parliamentarians who've joined me here. Angus Robertson, who's the leader of the Scottish Nationalists here at Westminster. John Mann, who Labour MP, who called for Gordon Brown to stand aside at the weekend. And Nigel Evans, a senior Conservative MP. Thank you all very much for joining us. John Mann, firstly to you. You've got what you wanted, and Gordon Brown has now said that he will step down. But you surely cannot expect voters to support a second unelected Labour Prime Minister, can you?
Well, it's a brave decision by Gordon Brown. It's the right decision to go now, following the election result, and it opens all sorts of possibilities. The electorate has given a hung parliament as its verdict. It's really uncharted territory in the way it's happening, and therefore we've got to work this through. But by what Gordon Brown's rightly done today, there are more options available, and it allows the Labour Party to look forward into the future as well. He's done well by the Labour Party. More importantly, I think he's done well by himself and by the country.
But do you really expect, though, voters to tolerate a second unelected Prime Minister in number 10?
I think that the voters are going to be stuck with whoever's there having no majority, and therefore what we need is good government. And it's an opportunity to see whether we can stop the Tories getting in, cutting health, cutting education, cutting jobs, because people weren't telling me they were voting for that when I was speaking on the doorstep.
Well, Angus Robertson, to you, I'll put that point. The SNP are not traditionally friendly with Labour Party, particularly in Scotland. Relationships can be very difficult. Do you really expect us to believe you could work constructively with the Labour Party?
Well, what you're talking about, of course, is the numerical reality, which is the potential as the outgoing Prime Minister now, and of course I pay tribute to his 13 years of public service in the outgoing Labour government, the numerical reality that there is a possibility for a progressive alliance, that's all the political parties, not including the Conservatives, and that could deliver economic stability and fairness, as John has pointed out, but as importantly, significant political reform, including proportional representation for the House of Commons. I think that would be an improvement on democracy in the UK. And the SNP has now for days been saying we will play our role. Of course, we're often in electoral contests, and sometimes they're pretty full on, but there comes a time when the people say we're giving no political party a majority in this place. Political parties will have to work together. 85% of voters in Scotland said they didn't want the Tories running the government, and that's why I think it's important for the Labour Party, for the Liberal Democrats, the SNP and others to work together.
But we are talking about the United Kingdom Westminster government here. How would it be an improvement on democracy for the party which got the most seats and the most votes not to be in any way, shape or form part of the government?
Well, we have a parliamentary system, and what determines the democracy is the majority of MPs across the Parliament. And if there are a majority of MPs who say we want to work together, get economic stability and political reform, and that happens to not include a political party that got one MP in Scotland, so be it. I think people in Scotland, I think Liberal Democrats at the present time will be saying, thank goodness. My goodness, why would the Lib Dems go into coalition with the Conservative Party and not deliver any form of electoral reform whatsoever? It's game on. Now it's up to political parties to work together. I welcome that.
Well, Nigel Evans, what do you make all of this? Your party has been trying to persuade the Lib Dems to go with you, but that hasn't quite worked out, has it?
Well, we don't know yet, do we? All we do know is that during the campaign, Nick Clegg said that he would more than likely support the party that won the election with the most votes. And funnily enough, that was David Cameron, 2 million more votes than the Labour Party. And yet we saw Gordon Brown trying to hang on. The fact that he's going in September, I think the country actually passed its verdict. Gordon, they want you to go now. And also they would prefer, I believe, the Liberal Democrats keeping to their word and working with the Conservative Party in the best interest of the country. This is what this is all about, surely. We're in the middle of an economic crisis here in this country. Surely what we need is the Liberal Democrats working in some form of alliance with the party that easily got the largest number of votes, the largest number of seats throughout the country, in order to start the work that needs to be done to put this country back on the road.
OK, thanks all very much for joining us. John Mann, just one brief final question to you. Next Labour leader, who's your money on?
My money would be on one of the younger politicians, but who knows? Even one of the older ones might get in. Okay. I think we've a wide array of choice.
And then straight to the country again then, John, is it? So that they can have the mandate of the British public?
if it comes to the 63% who don't want the Tories and the Tory cuts, perhaps that's what will happen.
Nobody, whoever you choose, nobody in the British public will have supported them at a general election.
Nigel,
we've just had 2.5 years
Nigel,
of
we
that.
don't have a presidential form of government in the UK.
Okay.
It's a parliamentary democracy.
Gentlemen, we must leave it there. I know this conversation will continue among you three and among all the political parties here at Westminster as the next week's extraordinary events play out, as the country's politicians grind their way towards forming the next government. Hugh, back to you.
Laura, let's see if we can match that lively exchange here in the studio, because I have Anne McElvoy of the London Evening Standard, Peter Riddle of The Times and Steve Richards of The Independent with me, just to take in what's happened, really, because it's been quite an afternoon, Anne.
It certainly has, yes. Well, 1 minute everyone was chugging along following the negotiations with the Conservatives. I suspect, like a lot of my colleagues, I'd spent the early afternoon and lunchtime sitting down going through the minutiae of how this Tory Lib Dem deal might work. And then Gordon Brown, whose timing in this case is absolutely exquisite, one has to say, in terms of keeping us all on our toes, has announced that he's stepping down, but not yet. And how very Gordon Brown is that? Personally, I think they'll have to hose him out of Downing Street before they'll get rid of him.
Steve, what has he done today in terms of all the negotiations and the timing that Anne referred to? What's Gordon Brown achieved?
It's a very, very big moment. I was speaking to quite a few of the people very close to Nick Clegg over the weekend, and they were saying to me, look, the media are getting ahead of themselves. Nick Clegg always said he would start talks with whoever got most votes, but people are reading into that an inevitable agreement. He was just doing what he said, and there was a sense of momentum, but it didn't mean it was inevitable. But they also said to me, the big problem with the alternative route, which is much more attractive to some of them, was Gordon Brown. That obstacle is removed. So not only do we have the drama of a prime ministerial resignation, the departure from national politics of a figure who's been huge since 1992, if not before, but we have perhaps the unlocking of a Lib-Lab arrangement. It's a very, very big moment.
Peter, do you agree that it's that big, it's that significant?
Oh, we're talking about one of the real momentous moments in political history. Also, it came as a surprise to members of the Cabinet. I talked to two around lunchtime who thought the game was up. They were assuming there'd be some kind of Lib-Con deal. Some, I think, are quite sceptical about whether this will actually work or not. And I think within 10 minutes or so, there was quite strong words, why didn't you consult us? Because this is the first meeting of the Cabinet since the election day. He bounced the Cabinet. It was a very audacious move, Gordon Brown. For full credit to him, it's a game changer, and in that respect. The other point is the arithmetic. Remember, Libs and Labs don't give an overall majority. It's reliant on nationalist MPs and independent MPs. It's the only way it can work. So, as Douglas Alexander was saying only a few minutes ago, it's an enormous challenge, which is a political euphemism for saying it's high risk. I'm not sure it can come off.
Well, we're watching the comings and goings in Downing Street as we speak, because, of course, that Cabinet meeting starts in under 10 minutes' time. And we saw Peter Hain going in just a few seconds ago, the Welsh Secretary. There'll be other Cabinet members arriving too. And just a thought now on that Cabinet meeting, which has to take in the news that Gordon Brown has just announced. It's revolution for the Labour Party, but also opening up all kinds of options in terms of the future form of government here.
He's basically fired a starting gun for a Labour leadership challenge as well. We mustn't forget that sort of comes with the territory. So you've got all these people brought together to give their first view on a situation which is still fluid, which will forever mark them in the minds of their colleagues. I completely agree with Peter. I think it's an absolutely game-changing moment in British politics, and the way that it's been handled, we've seen nothing like it before. The prize is very great for the progressive centre and the left of centre, in that if it comes off, there could be this coalition that they have always dreamt of. I have to say, entering a word of caveat from the centre-right, that it doesn't appear to be quite what people voted for, but the fact is they didn't vote for anything very clearly. So in a sense, the game is open to whoever plays the game most smartly at this point, and then they have to convince the electorate that it is for the good of stable government and for the good of the country, because it's a bit of a risk, and it's also a little bit cheeky when you think about it.
And Peter, Steve, we'll take a break for a second, because we'll just take stock. It's been a very dramatic past hour here at Westminster, where Gordon Brown has announced that he will stand down as party leader after overseeing negotiations with the Liberal Democrats, which are aimed at forming what he said would be a progressive alliance, a progressive government, to provide strong and stable government in Britain. This is what he had to say.
The reason that we have a hung parliament is that no single party and no single leader was able to win the full support of the country. As a leader of my party, I must accept that that is a judgment on me. I therefore intend to ask the Labour Party to set in train the processes needed for its own leadership election. I would hope that it would be completed in time for the new leader to be in post by the time of the Labour Party conference. I will play no part in that contest. I will back no individual candidate.
Gordon Brown, Prime Minister, speaking in Downing Street just a short while ago, so just 4 days after he failed to win the general election. The Prime Minister has said he'll be gone in time for his successor to be in place by Labour's conference in the autumn. Our Deputy Political Editor, James Landale, looks back on Gordon Brown's remarkable and eventful political career.
After 10 years waiting in the wings, Gordon Brown was cheered as he left the Treasury for Downing Street in the summer of 2007, replacing Tony Blair without a contest, promising change and renewed trust in government.
I will try my utmost. This is my promise to all of the people of Britain.
It was the fulfilment of a long-held dream. He brought with him what he called his moral compass, instilled by his father, a church minister. From his early years at Kirkcaldy High School, he was a high achiever with a social conscience. At Edinburgh University, he was heavily involved in student politics. And after his election in 1983, he rose swiftly through the ranks, promoted to the shadow cabinet by Neil Kinnock, along with his friend and rival, Tony Blair. But when John Smith died suddenly in 1994, it was Blair who became leader. At an infamous dinner at this London restaurant, Mr. Brown agreed to stand aside, but the details of the deal haunted the New Labour project. Gordon Brown has always been a driven and private politician, but his life changed with marriage to Sarah Macaulay. He's spoken movingly about the death of their first daughter and about his two sons, one of whom has cystic fibrosis. As Chancellor, Mr. Brown gave the Bank of England independence and enjoyed initially prolonged growth and low inflation. He wielded huge control over large areas of domestic policy. Until finally he got to sit in the seat he'd coveted for so long. But within weeks of becoming Prime Minister, he faced acts of terrorism, foot and mouth, and floods across the country. Encouraged by good poll ratings and colleagues, he toyed with calling a snap election, but he hesitated and eventually called it off.
I'll not be calling an election, and let me explain why. I have a vision for change in Britain.
Rows over political donations and the loss of public data dealt further blows to his authority.
The House has noticed the Prime Minister's remarkable transformation in the last few weeks from Stalin to Mr. Bean.
And he had to admit his abolition of the 10p tax rate was a mistake.
We've listened to what people are saying about the effects on different groups, and we've made the changes as a result of that.
And soon, even his reputation for economic competence was called into question as the credit crunch began to bite. Northern Rock suffered the first run on a major British bank in recent history. And Mr. Brown brought Peter Mandelson back from the cold to beef up his team, which was soon needed after his spin doctor, Damien McBride, resigned for making unfounded personal smears about senior Tories. And then last summer came the rows over expenses. The Home Secretary, Jackie Smith, resigned after claiming for adult films watched by her husband.
Going around the country, I've been struck by the comments.
Gordon Brown's YouTube performance proposing changes to the system fell flat. And he was mocked by his Communities Secretary, Hazel Blears. She resigned from the Cabinet, as did the Welfare Secretary, James Purnell, on the day of the European elections in June 2009, when Labour came third with just 16% of the vote.
Thanks very much.
Mr. Brown saw off his critics then, only to face another coup attempt early this year. But again it failed.
I will not waver. I will not walk away. I will get on with the job, and I will finish the work.
In the face of declining poll ratings, he attempted to show a softer side to his character. But there were fresh allegations about bullying in Downing Street. And then this. Out campaigning, he met a woman called Gillian Duffy.
You can't say anything about the immigrants.
His private remarks about her were replayed to him publicly within moments.
Someone has just handed me the tape. Let's play it and see if we can hear it.
She'll never put me with up with that woman.
What did she say?
Everything. She's just a sort of bigoted woman.
Mr. Brown visited her at home to apologise, but the damage was done. Gordon Brown entered the election arguing that his substance and experience would defeat calls for change. In the end, it was not enough. James Landale, BBC News.
James Landale there, our Deputy Political Editor, with that assessment of Gordon Brown's remarkable career. And that is how things stand at Westminster this evening. These are the images over the Palace of Westminster. Gordon Brown is preparing to hold a cabinet meeting at 10 Downing Street, starting in just a few minutes' time, after that dramatic news that he is to stand down as Labour leader within months, and the future political landscape of the country now even more uncertain than ever. David Dimbleby will be here with a special programme at 8:30 on BBC One. The 6 o'clock news follows. But from me, it's goodbye.